So we've had Silksong for like 2 weeks, and the Bilewater zone is largely considered the most frustrating in all of Farloom. There's a lot of hate for this sickly, swampy region for good reason. The enemies explode, the maggot-infested waters sap Hornet's silk so she can't even heal, there's random-ass traps everywhere, one of the benches crumbles away and drops Hornet into a pit, the run back to the boss fight from even the secret bench is a lengthy one, and the boss fight itself forces you to fight a few waves of enemies each time you trigger it. I loved every horrendous minute of it. With Bilewater, you see, Team Cherry crafted Metroidvania perfection for a certain type of masochistic player like myself. It's an accumulation of all the unfairness of Farloom that both thematically and mechanically rewards patient players who thoroughly explore its putrid corridors and other regions before visiting. Furthermore, it challenges how you've played the game up until that point, forcing you to adapt lest you drown in its maggot-infested waters. Another way to think of Bilewater is like an optional challenge area that you find in other Metroidvania games. One that the developers hid out of the way that really tests the skill of completionists. Like those areas, Bilewater isn't required to finish Silksong. However, Team Cherry wove it into the world and lore, and completing it does contribute to the true endings of the game. All that said, I completely understand why many, if not most, would disagree with me here. After my early assessment of Silksong's difficulty, I stand by my conclusion that Team Cherry needs to patch in some kind of difficulty release valve for players that want it. Anyone who tells you to get good if you're frustrated or struggling with Silksong should get some grass to touch. Anyway, allow me to elaborate, starting with how the unfriendliness of this region fits into the lore. If you follow Chakra's questline, she'll lead you to an area within Bilewater full of clean, beautiful water. Clearly, the area wasn't always toxic, and if you read some of the lore tablets hidden throughout, you learn that the bugs here have a strong hate for the Weavers and their pilgrims from the Citadel because they're responsible for polluting Bilewater. This is most obvious when reading the tablet above the boss arena. Hate for their light, hate for their pins, for their waste poured thick and endless. Given that Bilewater is directly below the putrefied ducts, it's clear that the waste from the Citadel seeped down into it, ruining the ecosystem and turning the bugs within, called Stillkin, bitter and hostile, emphasizing a theme of industrialization that runs throughout Silksong. You can see where the residents of Bilewater have strung up pilgrims to die, and a tablet nearby emphasizes hate for them for ruining their home. It makes sense that Bilewater is the most hostile region toward Hornet because she's half Weaver herself. Other than the silk threads literally mind-controlling bugs, the contrast between the coral chambers and Bilewater serves as one of the more impactful pieces of world building in the game, which I think is a difficult feat in a genre that doesn't rely on cinematics and exposition. Every aspect of Bilewater also backs up this tragic lore. It makes sense that the bugs here explode with putrid goo when popped by Hornet's needle, as they've evolved with their toxic environment. It makes sense that the Stillkin stalk you and leap out of the bushes guerrilla style when living in the shadow of the far mightier Citadel and its warriors. Of course they planted traps everywhere. Of course the water sapped the silk of the Weavers. Of course the one symbol of safety in the entire game, a bench to rest at, is a decoy, with cheeky signs drawing you toward it only to subvert your expectations, as up until Bilewater the signs didn't lie. More importantly than all this lore, however, is how Bilewater provides the try-hard players like myself a frustrating wall to bang their head against, though the thorough and patient will find cracks to exploit in its imposing unfairness. First and foremost, you can visit Bilewater quite early through a secret entrance in Sinner's Road, or by swimming through the maggot waters to the east of the exhaust organ. But you can't get very far until much later when you unlock the double jump. Up until that point, most regions you could reach were more or less fully explorable, but Bilewater leaves you wondering if you missed something in its dark, maze-like corridors. The only clue is one of Chakra's rings up on this wall that you cannot reach, a surefire sign you need to come back with a new ability. This reinforces an important lesson. Not all areas are meant to be explored right away, even if you can reach them, especially Bilewater. Just about every other horrid aspect has a way to overcome it. One bench is a trap, sure, but for the thorough, there's a hidden one to find that greatly decreases the run back to the boss arena. Of course, there's no signs that point the way to it. Likewise, if you take your time to explore outside of Bilewater, you'll upgrade Hornet's needle thrice. As a result, those exploding bugs die rather quickly, and so too does the boss, Grohl the Great. More importantly, finding 2 amulets make navigating Bilewater much easier. The Ascendant's grip from Jubiliana in Songclave and the Wreath of Purity from the Putrefied Ducts. The grip is self-explanatory. Bilewater features a couple of vertical climbs that benefit greatly from being able to stay in place and dodge some mutated bug vomit. It's also great to use against the boss, as the waves of foes can't really reach Hornet if she chills up in the corner of the arena. I hadn't used the grip, but in making Bilewater so treacherous, it forced me to reconsider a loadout I hadn't really changed up until that point. The Wreath of Purity was a different matter. You normally don't access the putrefied ducts until you finish Bilewater, but the astute and determined will find a back entrance to it through the Memoriam and thus grab the Wreath of Purity early, which in turn negates much of the drawback of those silk sapping maggots. I stumbled upon it accidentally while solving a tracking wish, almost as if Team Cherry were guiding me there. Once I returned to Bilewater with the Wreath of Purity and the double jump unlocked, I felt like a genius, as it greatly decreased my frustration as you're forced to go swimming in the murky waters more than once. Which brings us to the run back to the boss. I think Grohl the Great and his minions took me like 7 or 8 tries to defeat. By then, I had this run back down and it didn't seem too bad at all. Especially with the Crest of the Wanderer equipped, as it helped bounce off these flies and exploding acid bubbles. Would I have preferred a closer bench? Yeah, sure, maybe. Would it have thematically and mechanically fit such an unforgiving region? Probably not. With waves of enemies to fight before Grohl the Great makes his grand entrance, I had to really focus while fighting him to learn his patterns, as failure was much more punishing than, say, against the Widow or the Phantom. The fight against Grohl taught me to use the relatively new to me Clawline ability, as it allowed me to get above him and, with the fully upgraded to that point needle, I could bounce off him all day. Once discovering this method, I also discovered that Grohl was not so great. Boss defeated, Team Cherry put a cherry on top of Bilewater's frustrating yet rewarding cake. A bench pops up into the arena, juxtaposing the earlier trap. A bit of a cruel joke, perhaps only appreciated by the most self-punishing Metroidvania fans out there. Those that hated Bilewater might not have appreciated this cheeky gesture. And if you didn't appreciate it, I hope that Bilewater wasn't too much. I did see people complaining online that Bilewater was a massive wall and where they stopped playing. And I think that's a shame, because in its difficulty lies its perfection. Bilewater forces you to adapt to it, much the same way the bugs who call Bilewater home adapted to their polluted environment. And as a result, creates one of the most rewarding and memorable Metroidvania areas I've experienced since playing Animal Well. It's one that I want everyone to enjoy. Though perhaps enjoy isn't the right word. Appreciate? Something like that. But enough about me, what about you? How did you find Bilewater overall? Did you find another area more frustrating or rewarding? Let me know in the comments. I always do my best to respond. And that's it for this video. If you don't know who I am and what I'm about, my name is Lowell and I'm a freelance game critic, content creator, and guide writer. You might have read my words on websites like Nintendo Life and PC Games N, or watched video guides of mine over at Gamer Guides. I actually made a dedicated video guide for Bilewater over there, so maybe check that out if you're still struggling. So right now my daughter is quite young, almost 6 months old, but when she's a bit older I plan on uploading to this channel far more frequently with narrative critiques, opinion pieces like this one, and even more on the games I play for the various websites I freelance for. If that sounds good to you, maybe like and subscribe. Thanks, bye!